First speaker, you can start the debate.
Okay, let me set my timer. I'd like to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Now, Chair, while it's crucial to recognize positive achievements of good leadership, it is still crucial to deeply scrutinize the repercussions of glorification we are proud to propose. Now, moving on to some characterization of these key terms. Now, the glorification we're talking about is a sort of praising and honoring someone to an elevated and exalted kind of level, right? It involves highlighting all their virtues and achievements while ignoring any form of negative criticism or any form of negative things that this person may have done. So, necessarily speaking, in this debate, glorification looks like a sort of putting someone on a pedestal, um, devoid of ridicule and devoid of any form of scrutiny, right? Now, who are these benevolent leaders? These are authoritarian rulers who possess like absolute power over the nation, right? They use absolute authority and they control almost everything within that nation. For example, Paul Kagame of Rwanda and Kuan. Now, moving on to the context on which we are going to be debating. Firstly, it's important to recognize that true, these leaders might have had positive achievements in their respective countries. However, because people have been blindsided by these positive impacts, necessarily meaning that they want to continue we want to continue seeing these things, and they want to continue labeling their leader as all good and no form of bad criticism on top of them. They tend to put a blind eye necessarily on what this leader has done or the negative contribution they might have committed to society. Now, on a bit of preemptive, side opposition may argue that they bring development and whatnot, but sustainable progress does not solely rely on the speed at which it's being done. It also relies on principles of inclusivity, accountability, and a fundamental preservation of human rights. Now, moving on to the metrics on which we are going to define regret. We are regretting something when it does not fulfill its primary purpose, when it does more harm than good, and when it's not principally justified. Now, moving on to the argument that we're going to bring up on the impact of what this glorification would actually cause to society. Now, one, it leads to an erosion of democratic principles. The premise of this argument is that it causes limited accountability and checks on powers on these leaders. These leaders consolidate power without robust systems of checks and balances because the glorification tends to put a blindfold on people's eyes. Why is it necessary true? Why is this premise true? Without checks and balances, there is a risk of these leaders suppressing dissent. This looks like suppressing oppositional ideas or anything that tends to oppose them because people want to continue believing that this person has a positive image. It also looks like a restriction on freedom of speech, whereby anyone who has any opposing ideas or any ideas that are contrary to what the ruling leader wants to propose or to present are put aside and are restricted on their freedom of speech. It also looks like manipulation of information to make the leader even appear more good and more better. And it is also true because it weakens democratic institutions. It allows for these leaders to consolidate more power since no people are willing to criticize them, and there's an inherent lack of accountability in the leaders' actions. This necessarily means that it incentivizes them to consolidate power through areas of nepotism where they hire people who are necessarily not going to oppose them and people are not going to scrutinize them because that's something that people are not familiar with. So the claim that this argument makes is that the glorification inadvertently undermines the fundamental principles of democracy by fostering unchecked authority, by eroding and keeping government officials, by eroding the essence of keeping government accountable to its citizens. This necessarily means that it's removing the principles of democracy by removing the fact that there's no accountability within this kind of form of governance. So now the importance of democracy and the importance of having this accountability is that a weakened democracy diminishes citizens' participation within electoral processes. It scenario means that the government is going to have full control of what the people's lives are going to mean that, and it could also have a negative impact on what these people are actually living like. It also happens some sort of political diversity because political diversity opens it to development of countries, and political diversity is where there's presence of like opposition and form of kind of negative feedback to enable people to do better and do better. It also threatens individuals' freedoms of speech and freedoms to exercise their authority and freedoms to actually express their own opinion. The impact of this, it fosters an environment that is ripe for authoritarianism, where the leader can continue to believe that they have no form of accountability and no form of this. So without the checks and balances, there's a high risk of short-term gains overshadowing the long-term societal well-being societal well-being, which is going to be degraded because of the lack of fundamental principles of democracy and accountability. Now, moving on to the argument that my speaker is going to talk about, is going to talk about the impact that this form of like glorification is going to have on the society as a whole, and it's going to look like how this glorification is necessarily harmful, and it's going to prove the matrix of regret, which I stated in my first speech. So, in a conclusion, this glorification presents a mirage of stability and masks any form of human atrocities or any form of removes any form of accountability to these individuals. And as a society, it is imperative to criticize and challenge this glorification, ensuring that government is founded among principles of democracy. With that, I rest my case.
Thank you for that fine speech and for keeping as well. Let's have the first negative speaker to start the case of opposition.
Okay, am I audible enough?
Yes, you are audible.
And I'd like to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Pano, we live in a world where everyone believes that their ideologies are the best and do not want to listen to anyone else. A world filled with wrangles and little decisions passed. A world that needs an iron hand to enforce and make decision making easier. This is where the need for dictators came about. First of all, I'd like to begin by saying that the past proposition defined a benevolent dictator as a dictator. He did not necessarily define what a benevolent dictator is. This is a person, a ruler considered by some as a dictator, but has the support of the people, unlike a malevolent dictator, which is what First Prop described, who only focuses on themselves. But this type of dictator does things necessarily for the betterment of his society, not for himself. Now, what does this type of dictator look like? This type of dictator looks like, number one, doing things for the betterment of their countries, regardless of the means. Number two, stopping anything that tries to get them out of power. Number three, bringing their countries out of poverty through a lot of things. Number four, implementing policies for the economic development of their countries, i.e., the facilitation of foreign investors in their countries. Number five, it looks like not consulting others when making decisions, which makes decision making in a country easier, right? Now, what is the importance of this characterization? You realize that this characterization is the only characterization that shows you that benevolent dictators are not the kind of dictators who make irrational decisions based on emotion, but the kind that does things for the development of their countries. Look at Kagame and Kuan, who have brought their countries out of poverty, right? These are dictators who came into power, found their countries very poor and suffering, but implemented policies, united their people, and did so many things and led their countries out of poverty, right? We realize that dictators may have some disadvantages, right? But they also have more disadvantages. Number one, the development that they bring about in these societies. Let me bring about this ideology, this saying that a wise man once said: a rich man is a happy man, right? That means that no matter what these dictators might be doing in their countries, as long as they have brought them out of poverty and brought about this wealth that's making their citizens happy, at the end of the day, this is much better than the minor complaints that other people may have about dictators, right? And I realize that the second definition we have in today's debate is glorification, which is the action of describing or representing something as admirable, right? Now, this looks like using leaders as examples of good leaders, teaching children in schools about these leaders. Now, realize something about glorification. Glorification is only given when necessary. You cannot glorify something if it does not deserve it. By the time you start glorifying a benevolent dictator, it means they have done things to deserve it, right? They're not glorifying the malevolent dictators that everyone thinks about, people like the president of Russia or the president of North Korea. No, we are glorifying dictators who have brought about development, the benevolent dictators, right? Now, the importance of this characterization is that it shows you the glorification of these benevolent dictators encourages others to follow in their footsteps, leading to more development that they bring about. Now, look at this. What these countries and these dictators rule looked like, countries like Rwanda and Singapore, before they came into power. Number one, they were very poor at first before they came into power. They were divided on social lines, e.g. tribalism. We all know about the genocide that happened in Rwanda, where they killed multiple people among the Tutsi and the Hutu. And number three, it looked like trying to develop, they were trying to develop when they were divided. But when these benevolent dictators came into power, they pushed for development. Number two, they silenced those who went against them. And number three, they united these people by force, right? Now realize that one of the metrics of regrets the past people brought about is when the harms outweigh the benefits, right? Now look at this. You can only regret something if the harms outweigh the benefits. But in this world, the benefits outweigh the harms. So there is no need to regret. The benefits that these benevolent dictators have brought about in their countries outweigh the harms that they have brought. A universally recognized argument, which is number one, political stability brought about by this type of dictators. Number one, the premise of this argument is that human beings are the type of creatures that need an iron hand to stop them from doing something, right? In most democratic governments, crimes don't stop because they know that if they get caught, they will only go to prison. And in case a criminal truly deserves a punishment, they will vote and usually gets off easy, right? But in a country ruled by a dictator, this dictator will make a judgment alone. He will not need to consult anyone on this judgment. That is to say, if a person has killed someone, this dictator has a very high chance of killing this person. Now, if the citizens of this country know that if I kill someone or if I steal, the dictator is very unreasonable and you might end up killing me, then this will bring about that sort of deterrence of crimes, right? Now, the importance of this is that you realize that now there is more justice and more political stability achieved. Because of this deterrence, criminals are afraid of committing crimes because they know that if they commit crimes, there's a high chance they may die, right? So there is that deterrence. Now, this is important in the debate because it shows you the huge benefit of this political stability outweigh the small harms, right? And the impacts are the better world. He talks about how our world lacks accountability, but realize this, the development brought about by these dictators is living accountability, living proof. If you see your country is developing, you do not need a political leader to come and tell you what they are doing if you are seeing it. So you realize our world has that accountability that said it does not have, right? And then he also talked about how another metric of regrets is that if it does not fulfill its primary purpose, the primary purpose of these dictators coming into power was to bring about development in their countries. Now, these dictators have brought about the development, which we all see, right? So you cannot tell me that it does not fulfill its purpose. So both the metrics of regrets that it brought about, number one, do not stand. And number two, my second speaker is going to come and tell you the other benefits of these benevolent dictators and how they outweigh the harms, right? And with that, I would like to rest my case. Proud to oppose.
Thank you, first opposition, for that fine speech. Let's have the second opposition to continue the case of a proposition.
Okay, so I hope I am pretty audible. I'm going to begin my speech in 3. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, so I'm going to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Dictatorship, benevolent or not, is less with negative connotation and associated with brutality and oppression. We think we cannot glorify megalomania. We think we cannot support brutality. We refuse to glorify oppression. Proud to propose. 2 key things that I'm going to do in this debate. One, I'm going to do rebuttal. 2, I'm going to have a bit of impact analysis on the things our first speaker tells you about accountability, representation, and practically participation. But then first with rebuttal. They come and tell us all things like, okay, so bringing a country out of poverty, this is why then we should necessarily glorify dictatorship. 2 key things here. Notice that our first speaker addresses this particular issue. We are attributing success to things that did not to people that did not actually necessarily cause this sort of bringing out of poverty. This looks like the reason as to why most countries are actually getting out of poverty and whatnot is because of massive industrialization. It's because of things like an educated population and whatnot. What does this then necessarily mean? It means that these particular people are the ones that actually have the reason as to are the main reason as to why these particular countries do necessarily get out of poverty at the end of the day. But even if this is true necessarily, we think that at a point in time you're having some sort of benevolent dictator oppressing you and whatnot. You cannot enjoy these particular kinds of systems that are maybe set up in an area. This looks like having a North Korean president and whatnot does not necessarily allow you to speak up in public or move out of your very own country. Secondly, it looks like you're oppressed every single day, not necessarily having a choice or a choice or a right to autonomy at the end of the day. Why this thing is problematic is that you do not get to express yourself as a human being, and we think that this is very bad. Why? Because you get to have you get to have some of your rights are limited at the end of the day, and you're not able to be full. We think at that particular point in time can then not necessarily support a benevolent dictator at the end of the day. Whereas on our side of the house, this is then much more better off, because we tell you, we analyze that, okay, yes, poverty a country can be brought out of poverty, not necessarily using benevolent dictators. This is why you then necessarily do not need to glorify them at the end of the day. Secondly, we tell you that it is then much more better for you to have human rights and your rights accorded to at the end of the day, rather than mainly constituting around things like money that are more of materialistic things. Then also, secondly, he talks about, okay, so these particular dictators do not consult others while making decisions, which makes them necessarily rational. Notice that this is entirely feeble. Why? Notice that at a point in time, you're not consulting others. You're most likely going to end up making decisions based on your own feelings, based on tribalistic nature and whatnot, based on things like ethnicity and whatnot. The impact of this then is that you're going to have a dictator making decisions based on most likely favoring his family, or maybe favoring a certain tribe and whatnot. What this then means is that you're going to have a country that does not necessarily have that much of that has maybe development constituted in a certain area and not necessarily constituted at the end of the day. Now, the glorification of these kinds of dictators means that you're going to even have more countries taking on this through coups and whatnot. The impact of this then is that you're going to have no political stability at the end of the day. Why? Because you get to have these particular leaders. Leaders trying to strive to achieve development through the benevolent dictators. Now, this entirely means that you're going to have a more ruthless LDCs and problems. Now, on our side of the house, our side of the house is much more better. Why? Because we tell you that democracy is something that can, even when it's bad, it's something that can entirely heal. Why is this so? At a point in time, maybe a bad president has gotten into power and whatnot. This particular person can then entirely be voted out, whatnot, so that you can then become a much more better person. On the other side of the house, these things are not entirely possible, and you still have a rise of dictators like that, the kinds of Franco, Hitler, and whatnot that arose during World War II and whatnot at the end of the day because of this particular glorification. We think at that point in time, you get to notice that while glorification is something that is entirely bad and something you cannot necessarily attribute to. Because the more you glorify something that is entirely bad, it means you create that particular sort of platform in front of people that, this is something bad, is what we should necessarily adopt as a developing country and take on, so that you can then necessarily have development. That something that is very hazardous. But then that, on the whole idea of dividing on lines of power and how necessarily, and not again, and how necessarily dictatorship is something that achieves this at the end of the day. We consider this particular justification, but we tell you that this is not necessarily something good. Why? Because you get such bad things at the end of the day, like I tell you on earlier. But then the whole idea of there is punishment that actually happens and comes through harshness, which causes these tyrants. Two things here. First, based on the principle of collective good, we think that people have a chance to change and whatnot. That then entirely means that at a point in time that may be committed a crime and whatnot, and that they can then reform. The other things will then come in with my third speaker. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that speech. Very short over encourage other speakers to make sure they don't use more than 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Let's have the second speaker from opposition.
While the affirmative has come with a few assertions that don't seem reasonable. One thing that the first speaker came and said is that this glorification of these benevolent dictators allows them to consolidate power in the form of restricting opposition's freedom of speech and encourages a lack of accountability. But one thing we should understand is that these benevolent dictators are still within the arm of the law. Another thing that the benevolent dictators encourage, as you are going to see later in my speech, is that they encourage the building of clean governments. What do I mean by this? That these governments are normally corruption free. They push for this agenda. I don't see how a leader that is pushing for corruption free freedom in their country promotes a lack of accountability. Another thing that they push forward in this debate is that it diminishes democracy, and that undermines the sustainable development of these countries. Why? Because they believe that democracy is a requirement for development in a country. One thing we can realize is that several third world countries have democracies but are still failed to develop. On the other hand, there are multiple community states which have developed even without democracy. What am I trying to say is that democracy is not a prerequisite for development in a country. And I think we should realize in this debate Another thing we should realize in this debate is that this glorification does not necessarily diminish democracy in the country. I'm going to go on to talk about what their second proposal talked about, and one of the things they said is that people will be oppressed and will not be able to express themselves, and that countries can be brought out of poverty without the benevolent dictators. She also said that they make irrational decisions which may point towards tribalism and nepotism, and there is a possibility of coups, and it leads to the rise of bad dictators if we glorify any dictator at all. One thing I'm going to say towards the thing of the countries being brought out of poverty is, one, there are multiple case studies of countries being brought out of poverty without benevolent dictators. But one thing we realize with these countries which have been subject to benevolent dictatorship is that they experience a very rapid economic growth, very rapid political growth, and very rapid social growth. Why? Because these leaders are strong arming them into the right path. A lot of the time when people are left to their own devices, one person says one thing, which is a good idea, another person says another, but it does not necessarily but since they cannot come to an agreement, no one does anything, and thus it affects them, and they are not able to make decisions that benefit the development of their country. Another thing they say is that they make irrational decisions which may point to nepotism and all that. But one thing we realize is that these benevolent dictators normally have the support of all the people. They're only regarded as dictators by a few. Why? Because those people have been refused the right to speak. Another thing they say is that there's a possibility of coup. But one thing we should realize again is that these people have support of majority of the people in the nation. So if a coup exists, that coup is not justified. Another thing that she talked about is that it leads to the rise of bad dictators. Because if we're glorifying something that is bad, one thing you should realize is that we're not justifying glorification of malevolent dictators. As my first speaker said, there is a difference. These people are working for the good of the nation, and they're only regarded as dictators by a few. But one thing we realize is that these people still deserve to be glorified. Why? Because these people have injected. These people have the country's best image, best interests in their minds. I'm going to go on to my point. One thing is that they facilitate economic development by implementing economic policies that bring about foreign investment and all that. For example, Paul Kagame, the leader of Rwanda, under his regime, Rwanda set up a deal with Arsenal to put the Visit Rwanda on their jerseys. Another thing we have seen during his regime is the development of Rwanda Air. This development means that there is more employment, there are better standards of living, and when there are better standards of living, these people are able to provide for themselves more, leading to happiness. Another thing that they do that shows that they deserve to be glorified is that they facilitate the building of clean governments, as I said earlier. These governments are normally corruption free. Evidence of this is that Rwanda is one of the least corrupt countries in Africa, and Singapore recently ranked the 5th least corrupt country in the world. What does this show? It shows that these people under their regime, under their policy building, they facilitated for corruption fighting, and this is not possible in countries which do not have strong armed people. Why? Because we see it. Corruption is rampant in several democracies where there is not a person who is able to dictate. For example, Uganda. Another thing is, what does this mean when there's less corruption in the country? It means that there's more money for development, and that's the earlier benefits of development to the country that I stated earlier apply here. But also, it gives the people a corruption-free mentality. What do I mean? That these people will soon put corruption below themselves. They'll say that I am from a corrupt-free nation. Why should I be corrupt? It builds a mentality that fosters anti-corruption in such a country. So even after these people's regimes, this country will still stay corrupt-free. Another thing is that they still for these civil rights of a few of the minorities in these countries. What do I mean? That these opposition leaders who have alternate ideas to these people are refused from speaking. Why? But because they have a greater good in mind. They believe that under their regime, development will take place. And we have seen through evidence of Rwanda and Singapore, their rapid economic and political growth, that this development still takes place, even when they're stifling the rights of some people. Why? Because they have the greater good in mind. And they pave the way for genuine democracy. An example of this is Kuan Yiew. He stepped down from being the Prime Minister of Singapore and later served in minor roles in the Singapore cabinet. And now Singapore is a genuine democracy. Why? Because he paved the way for it. Another thing is that if they just leave the opposition to run with their own arguments, and someone with a poor vendetta comes in, a person who is very good at speaking but has bad intentions, this person will be able to destroy whatever these people have been working for, whatever dictators have been working towards. We have seen multiple situations where a person with a smooth tongue is able to convince the masses into voting them into power, but then they don't work with the public interest in mind. So we believe that these people strong arm the government so that everything works for the development of the people. Another thing is that they facilitate order and development in this country. My third speaker will come and weigh the debate. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that speech, Manuel. I hadn't realized that you made it to the call. You're most welcome. Let's have the last speaker to come to the debate. The call will be ready ASAP, so don't leave the call after the third speaker. The third speakers, starting with proposition. The floor is yours now.
To confirm audibility. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. You can start your speech.
Okay, let me set my timer. Now I begin my speech in 3. Pano, what do we get from team opposition? Team opposition fails to understand what the debate is entirely about. They fail to understand that vis-a-vis them being called benevolent leaders, benevolent dictators, still they come under the fact that they are still dictators. So what am I going to show you in today's debate? I'm going to show you what the clashes of emotion were, and I'm going to show you which team won each clash, and I'm going to show you which team would have done that better to win that clash. So Pano, I begin on the clash of oppression. Now they come and say that people, the leaders, these leaders have the power, have the rights of people. But now they forget that now when you come under, you find that people lack the freedom of speech. You now find that people are oppressed. People do not have the freedom to express themselves in the nation. That is what we come and tell you. We come and tell you that in these states where we are seeing the benevolent dictators, we are seeing that people are going to do what? Are going to lack the freedom of speech. People are going to lack the freedom of expressing themselves, the freedom of expression. And now, what does that mean? Does that mean that the country is evolving socially? That is a lie. So now they again come and talk about poverty, that such countries have improved. They are not poor, like for example, poverty has been eradicated. But now, when you bring in a compulsion as to what they consent to, like for example, a country like China, which is democratic, a country like USA, when you compare the development and the zero poverty that is in such countries, and to the poverty in these countries, you find that now when you make a compulsion, you find that the development is kind of way better than these countries. And now, when you talk about the poverty and poverty, yeah, we consent to the fact that these leaders have a certain way. They have done something to the development. They have zeroed down the poverty. But now, when you bring in the compulsion, we find that now democracy outweighs all their benefits. That's why we concede to the fact that we would rather glorify a democratic leader than a benevolent dictator. Now they again come and talk about talk about a clean government. But now look at this. How can a clean government be there when we are seeing corruption in a way where we are seeing favoritism and nepotism coming in? What do we say? We tell you that now when these leaders come into power, they have to now come and do what? They have to now come and do what, and now bring in people of their own choice, not people that are varied, not people that have the audacity to come and develop their country, but rather the people they think that are close to them. That's what we talk about. Now, how that can never, the thing of a clean government or a corrupt-free government does not lie in this debate, because now we see favoritism, we see nepotism, we see all sorts of corruption coming in a disguised way. That's why we come and tell you that these leaders, well and good, they have done something good, but this something good they have done has blindfolded the people, has blindfolded the people, that people cannot literally see the bad effect or the bad side of such a leader, and which now brings in the fact that people have to now come, which now comes brings the fact that people are not seeing what the bad effect of such a person. Now they come and talk about they come and talk about we come and tell you that now when you see people will fail to get accountability, there's limited accountability. Now citizens of a certain state have rights, the accountability of the government. What is the government doing? What is the government doing towards the development? They have that accountability. But in such states, we find that people do not have accountability because, one, the leader has absolute political power over the state. He has no one, he doesn't report to anyone or anyone. He doesn't report anyone or any organization, which means whatsoever he does is only accountable to himself, not to any people. That's what we come and tell you that, one, we have seen limited accountability. We again come and tell you that there will be lack of participation and representation. Now, look at this. So, which means in such states, having a parliament, having the judiciary, having the legislature is it shouldn't be in place, because now when you see all these states, when you see all these organizations, they bring in what we call the participation and representation. But now when you come back and now see in such states where we are seeing benevolent leaders, where we are seeing this dictatorship, or these dictators who only can decide on their own selves, who do not need ideas from other people, and now who do not need ideas from other people, which means such organizations shouldn't be in place. We come and tell you, one, if a country like Rwanda, in a country like Rwanda, where people are entrusting all their development acts, all their development terms to one person who is the ruler. Now, whatever that ruler falls down, which means the development of a country has to do what? To cripple, which means the development of a country will not succeed as it has to be in place, which means now they are entrusting all their power to one person, which means that the fall of such a person, like for example Hitler, when he fell, the empire fell also. So that's why we are coming and telling you that now, when you bring in this thing of when you bring in this glorification benevolently dictators, it will now lead to that interesting of people who are now going to change with time, that interesting of people who will have to fall with time, and now will bring in the the fall of the nation. We now come and tell you that now, when you glorify the benevolent leaders, you are leading to the rise of such dictators. One, you are leading to the rise of dictators. You find that in years to come, other countries like Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya are going to have such people. And now, what are we seeing? They have more harm than good. We are seeing such. We have seen countries develop that have democratic leaders rather than benevolent dictators. So we come and tell you that, one, for development, for sustainable development, we should have participation. For sustainable development, we should have democracy. We rather opt for democracy than having people who now can think on their own. We rather have democracy where people have the right to speak, people have the right to oppress themselves, people have the right to express themselves, and people have the right to all freedoms of any case, because now it comes back to democracy for people to for a state to develop. Allow me to submit.
All right, thank you for that fine speech. Let's come to the last speech of the round from opposition.
Let me confirm audibility.
Yes, Davis, you're audible.
Also, time for speech for clarity. I think I did get it right. How many minutes? Coach Joseph?
Hey, it's 5 minutes, eh? Only 5.
5. Okay. It's well. Let me confirm audibility again before I start.
You're audible.
Fine. My speech starts in 3, 2, 1. Judge, there is something the team proposition does not actually understand from the start of our debate up to this final moment that we keep re-echoing and re-echoing for my first speaker. Even up now, I'm going to re-echo for them to understand. They are talking about, for them when they talk about dictatorship, they take it as a general whole of how a dictator behaves. But we remember in our first speech, we gave you a clarity on who a benevolent dictator is and a benevolent dictator is. And we show that you can see these people are different and they're working for different interests. You understand? So they try to front ideas of dictatorship and whatsoever as a whole. Let me tell you, dear judge, just because we are all male, that doesn't make us the same. Us being male does not make our thinking the same and does not make us have same interests. At the end of the day, it is what brings a clarity or a line of separation between a benevolent dictator and a malevolent dictator. Let me first run to our lines of, let me now make it clear for everyone to understand here. Basically, our debate is only running on the impacts and they are arguing on the democracy. So we need to see where democracy is, because in our second speech, we told that you see, democracy is not a prerequisite for development, and we are going to justify that, and we also show you why we think that the development of these nations and everything happening in these nations is entirely because of them having these benevolent dictators, something that they are failing to understand and to accept for this entire debate. Look, let us also understand and see that you see, let us measure how many countries are having the freedom of speech, which the effects of freedom of speech, the effects of the democracy they're talking about, that is in those countries, and how are they prospering. Look at most of those countries that have political parties rising up, people coming up and turning against their press and all those things. We are having chaos every other day. We are having slow decision making. And at the end of the day, they don't see all this. And we are trying to show that you see, in a world where I have a benevolent dictator, where no one is going to rise up against them, where no one is going to speak anyhow against them, we are going to have, number one, swift and quick decision making. Number two, very fast, very rapid development. And a lot is achieved in a short time. That is something that you do not see from the state of our debate up to this point. We tell that you see, before these people came into power, in a country like Rwanda, they had genocide and all those. People are divided along social lines on grounds of tribalism and other things. But when the man Kagame comes into power, he knows how to handle it. Yes, he's a benevolent dictator, but with a brain that like we told you, that is for the interest of the people. All these things were cut down, all these things were sorted, all these things were handled. And today we are seeing the unity we are seeing in Rwanda, and we are seeing the development that we see up to date. They try to suggest and say that you see, there's a lot of favoritism and nepotism just because this person is going to employ or is only going to work with the people whom he thinks are better for them. Yes, this person is only going to employ those ones that are better for the development of the nation. We repeat, for the development of the people, for the interest of the majority, and not for his own case. Why would I employ someone just because he feels is a good person, yet they're not going to help you develop at the expense of the development of the nation? So I rather employ the ones that are maybe close, that I'm very sure are going to help our country develop. Actually, we don't even see lines of favoritism in this, because you see, in a country like Rwanda, for instance, the one day when a relative of President Paul Kagame actually swindled funds that were meant to buy laptops for students in that nation, what happened? He put this person to prison, and his family was actually asking him why he did that, and he told them that you see, if it comes to the interest of Rwandans, it is okay. If this person took only one cow from my herd of cattle, that would be very okay. But here he's stealing money for these people. I couldn't accept that. That is someone who's working for the interest of the nation, and that is something they did not see. They try to claim that you see, that here that that their democracy actually outweighs the benefit of us having a benevolent dictator who does not front so much the ideas of democracy. And we told them that you see, we still don't agree to that. And we told you, because we are getting examples of how we've seen countries that are having chaos. Look at every time now and then, countries that have freedom of speech and political parties rising up, like I've told you, we are having riots, we are having chaos around, we are having destruction of property, we are having a lot of things happening in those nations. Why? Because someone thinks for them they don't agree with what the president is doing. At the extreme of ends, it is for the greater good. These countries are even having very slow development. Okay, they are going to try to front countries like USA and countries like China, like they fronted before. But they must also understand that you see, some of these nations started their journey of development way earlier. Some of these countries started like way earlier, and have been into the journey of development. So you cannot compare a nation that said its journey of development way earlier than to a country that started its development yesterday. It is why if a country started yesterday, we feel that you see this kind of dictatorship is what is actually leading to its fast growth because countries in the same category are not developed at any one moment. Look at a country like Uganda that has what you call a democratic system and all that. If we compare development to Rwanda, it's actually way better. Rwanda is being better and everything is working out good for them. So we really feel that we proved to you better that actually it is now where these countries are developing very fast, where we are having clean governments, because we are having these dictatorships, execute whoever is actually doing corruption, execute whoever is actually doing things the wrong way, execute whoever is not fulfilling their duties in government. They try to say that, you see, these people do actually not have governments. But you must understand that, you see, these people have people who are working around them. If they don't have governments, whom they be working with, whom they be sending to other to the areas where they wouldn't reach. And that is all happened because they have a government working with them. They talk about sustainable development. For them, they feel that, you see, in our model or in our kind of world, we don't have sustainable development. But we beg to inform them that, you see, in this kind of dictatorship, the people see what is being done by their dictator. And if there is anyone who will come up later after him, they can also adopt the same means, and development can still be sustainable. Development can still continue. And going back to the other model that is making development very slow, that is making making very short and all that. So therefore, we feel that with all this, we show you the better impact of having a benevolent dictator versus all other things. Okay, I beg to rest my case.
Oral feedback is here. I want to confirm whether we can hear me. Can anyone hear me? I would like
Very
to.
audible.
Thank you. Okay, so first, I want to upload us on the rich context that we have brought into the debate with regards to benevolence and leadership and what leadership is intended to achieve and on what system achieves both. I think there was quite a lot of argumentation towards the end. And I have to thank you for that. And I really encourage you to read quite widely on this topic because there's such a thing as very common debates, and this is one of like the most common debates, meaning they're like stock arguments for this debate. That a debate democracy versus dictatorship. Some arguments that are expected, and it's vital that a team at least prioritizes covering those arguments. It's like when you're defending capitalism, and I think the question on giving people freedom is fundamental. So once you're arguing for capitalism and you don't talk about the idea of self-determination and freedom, how people can be able to choose what they do with their lives and with their time for whatever amount of money they want, and then choosing how to use those results of labor, then you're missing the point. So I would advise we start to look into case files and look at stock arguments. They are very, very common debates. Ask yourself, what are the most common debates? Yes? And make sure at least you have some stock arguments which flow from like nowhere. A couple of pieces of feedback that are very, very important. The first thing is on choice of examples. So something examples do is that they make a debate more relatable and your arguments more persuasive. So one thing you need to ask yourself is, what examples work for my side of the house? And do not drag into the debate examples that are not in the spirit of the debate. For example, in this debate is speaking to the idea of benevolent dictators, not the other types of dictators. So unless you want to construct a link between benevolent dictators and malevolent dictators, or like those harsh dictators like Hitler and Amin and others, you should be able to construct the link and then you argue after constructing the link and use those examples after you've constructed the link. But I felt like using examples like Hitler, like Kim Jong-un, North Korea, it really doesn't add up. I think you need to remain within the confines of Rwanda, because even if you're to speak about human rights abuses, Lee Kuan Yew did quite a couple of them as well. Kagame has done millions of them, like we can't count. So it's really important to ask yourself every time in prep time, what examples work for us? What case studies? Because you see, examples enable you to be able to make a debate, how do I call this? To frame it from a personalized perspective, right? So getting examples is important, and perhaps this is where our opposition really good job with bringing forth examples that are like kind of relatable. So there needed to be like examples, and examples are not the debate, but again, if you are using them to substantiate your case, then again we have to look at those nuances and see, okay, well, are we missing a point here? The second thing is in regards to prioritization of argumentation. So in a regret debate, you need to set the grounds for comparison. For example, if you're saying that this glorification has like a negative utility on the world, then you have to set grounds which you're going to use to prove that position, right? Because and those grounds have to be clear, okay? So let's say on accountability, right? Let's say on promoting good governance ideals. right? Promotion, and you set those grounds, and then you start weighing in between glorification, a world where we glorify, and a world where we do not glorify. And because I didn't get clear metrics that proposition was advancing, they largely run arguments against benevolent dictatorship. And there's an argument there on the impact of glorification. I know it, and I'm going to come to that at a later time. But most of the argumentation does not like revolve around the glorification. And prioritization of argumentation, in this case, you focus on the arguments which are dealing with glorification rather than the whatever is being glorified, what the impact of glorification of that concept, not that concept itself. There can be a relationship. It is sometimes drawn. The differences in language, but again, in such a debate, language is very, very important. The other thing is on new material. There was new material in one of the whip speeches, and I had to really go back to the WSDC manual to exactly ascertain conditions on how to create this new material, especially on the question of sustainable development. Now, that's a very, very fundamental concept that can emerge out of glorification. However, it comes really late. And why we normally discourage third speakers from bringing forth new material, because I try to re-listen to this very, very, very part. Was it a rebuttal? Was it an extension of an argument? But I realized that it was like a new argument, because the way I think it was Mwebaze Arnold constructed it was, what if these people like die, right? What happens? It was like an exclusive new argument, because a question can construct itself as a claim and then you start explaining it. Whereas it's a good argument, which I think, by the way, should have formed the crust of the proposition case, and I don't hear it in my Maisoon speech, neither do I hear it in the first speech. I don't credit it because it is unfair for the first opposition, second opposition, and for you to put it on the third speaker who at times has like quite a lot of nuances to balance in the debate. So that new material. The other thing is on backing your colleagues. You people, you need to listen to your colleagues. If you are a second speaker, you have the duty of, let's say, extending arguments that have come from your proposition speech. If an argument comes in the props, sorry, not a prop speech, really, your speaker, right? If they bring forth a constructive argument, you can impact it, or at least bring it back into the debate. Also, whip speakers. There was like a very good argument, I think, which came from, was it Larry? Okay, the first, it was Rodney, I think. So there was this idea that for post-conflict societies, they are too fragmented to accommodate democracy, and in some sense, benevolence enables those societies to start to formulate themselves. A very, very good argument. However, I go to the second speech, I don't get it. I go to the last speech, I still don't get it. And I think that's not like a good thing. Eh? So listen to your friends and then back them up, because I think that's like really important. Of course, there was like really good team chemistry from proposition with regards to backing up arguments. They run an argument, but of course we're going to get to that. Let me see. Okay, then the last thing is on impacting your arguments. By the way, the idea of impacting your arguments, I think I should share some notes on what impacting arguments means, because I think we've talked about it, and I think I've had every OA of what the 12 spurs we've had, and they're talking about impacting. How do you get to impact? People need to know, why should we care about democratic principles? Yes, why should we care, right? You've told us, okay, these guys are against democracy, but the question is, sorry, I'm about to use like an interjection which is rude, but so what? So what? Like, why should we care about what you're speaking about? And I know Maisoon tries to extend this argument like very well by saying democracy has the power to heal itself like a wound, whereas an alternative system doesn't have. Then why should we still care? Why should we do that? And I think this is like really, really important. And for example, the last speaker of your debate could have simply extended this very argument by just impacting it by the analysis, only that they found it as like an exclusive argument rather than an extension of the other argument. So we need to start asking ourselves, why should people care about this specific analysis that I'm talking about, right? Who does it affect? That's important. You can link it to a stakeholder. Impacting using stakeholder analysis, impacting using like policy data, that's like statistics, or like the actual impact that would be causing. There's also using like a personalized frame. I'm going to share, I think I've written articles on framing, but also I'm going to try and write maybe I'm going to water down the contents to make sure we can understand it. Framing is very easy. It makes your argument relatable. Like someone is asking, okay, you've proved that an argument is true, but then why should we care about it, right? Where is the wing of the argument? Yes. And I think that's like very, very important. So this debate is won by all, and here is why. So broadly, proposition fail on their burden of proof, and one, they don't tell us exactly what exactly is bad with the erosion of democratic principles. Okay, they attempt to, only that there are fragments of it in every speech, and I feel like it should have been a coherent argument that should have been run from the beginning. The second impact which they bring forth into the debate that is related to that, which is the idea of encouraging dictatorships. They don't prove to me the link between the existence of benevolent dictators and then the perpetuation of dictatorship itself. Whereas that link can be made, it was not made. A suggestion that a link exists was made. So I think they could have paid more attention to establishing those links. Whereas opposition, they bring a wider context to what benevolence is, and they also prove to me substantially that accountability is possible in their world. Yes, and that is, and also they also substantiate the trade-off between rights and development. And I felt like Maisoon could have really done a better job here, especially in her opening statement. She had the idea. You can't glorify brutality, but then it like remains there hanging. So they really weaken you on the idea that really a rich person is a happy person, and there can always be a trade-off we can talk about here. And the fact that maybe there needs to be speed of development and the like. They really win largely, or like really a number of clashes, really. Even if it is democratic principles, I think this is the second speech. Emmanuel Asobola does quite a great deal of justice at this level, where they argue that democracy is not like a fundamental prerequisite to development, and that there are multiple case studies that prove otherwise. So I broadly think opposition really overpowered the crop case, and maybe it was a problem on how the debate was set up primarily. There was nothing to compare to. So now this is like general feedback as I end. So set the standards that you want the debate to be weighed against. It's like, okay, let me give a relatable example in the real. Yesterday, the Kenyan Supreme Court ruling on William Ruto and Raila Odinga. So before the case started, the judges had to ask people, let's agree on what the petitions are. One, the petition is, was there something unfair which happened in the technology system? Two, did the head of the EC connive? So you set standards which both people are going to start fighting against. It's like setting your battlegrounds and say, these will be my battlegrounds. And that's where, for example, Rodney comes ideally, and because you had set grounds but you didn't explain them. Purpose, because this is not just rhetoric. When you say we regret when the purpose is not achieved, but you don't talk about it. You talk about utility. But then again, you don't discuss anything around utility. You only discuss a principle. Now, a principled argument can only suffice or be established in a debate only if it is compared to a competing principle. In this case, the competing principle was benevolent dictatorship. So you are weighing against a democratic principles and benevolent dictatorship. So you then concentrate on analysis which proves that, and I think this is where like the link that Maisoon brought and later on Arnold established in the debate would have been important. And then you run it coherently as a team up to the end. So you have to compare that principle to something else if it is to stand. And I think these are things you can do. Ask yourself, okay, where am I lacking? Do I know how to set up comparative grounds for a debate? Do I know how to run a principle? These are things you can run actually, even if you say it in a day, I'm just going to run that. Let me learn how to frame in a day. These are very simple things. Trust me, they are easier than chemistry, they're easier than physics, and they are much easier than English. But you have to be intentional at running them. Ask yourself, where am I lacking? And then see exactly where you can improve in those areas. I see it's already 2 p.m. You guys have around. All the best. If you have questions, text on WhatsApp, I'll be available.